Everyone. My name is Kashun Visa. I'm a tech policy analyst. I've previously worked with the government of Pakistan, National Security Division, and the Prime Minister Office on foreign and tech policy. I'm currently in Atlanta. Today, we're going to talk about a very interesting topic, which is Pakistan Startup Fund, which aims to enhance the Pakistan startup ecosystem and bring VC investment in Pakistan by underwriting the risks associated with it. And the government is interestingly incentivizing this investment. And I'm very excited about this discussion because we're going to talk about this with none other than the person who's actually leading the initiative from the front lines in Islamabad, Lahore right now, Dr. Umar Saif. He is the caretaker federal minister for IT and telecom and has extensive experience in academia, management, consulting, and entrepreneurship in the field of IT. He has held notable positions in IT sector and also in government of Pakistan, including as chairman Punjab IT Board, vice chancellor of Information Technology University. In 2014, he was awarded the Sitara Imtiaz, which is one of the highest civilian awards in Pakistan in recognition of his outstanding services to Pakistan. He was the first Pakistani to be included in the world's top 35 young innovators by MIT Technology Review. He's also the first Pakistani to receive the Google Faculty Research Award. He was selected as Young Global Leader by World Economic Forum in 2010. He's also recipient of many prestigious awards, including MIT Technovator Award and the Digital Award from Microsoft Research. That's a huge introduction. I'm honored to have you, Dr. Umar Saif. Welcome to the webinar.
Thank you. Kashun, is that the right way to pronounce it? Kashun, thank you. And it really is a pleasure to be here. Should I start? Do you want me to start? How do you want to play this? You want to ask questions?
No, I will let you start. Just I want to drop a note for the audience that while we're doing the discussion, please keep dropping your questions in the chat. Please send your questions to Ali Fahad Bhai. Or if you're on the live stream like Facebook or YouTube, please drop your comments on the chat box and we'll try to get them as much as we can. So over to you, Dr. Saif.
Thank you, Kashun, and thank you everyone for taking out the time to dial in. It must be early for some people, late for some, but I guess that's how time zones work. So thank you everyone for taking out the time to be here. We are very excited to talk about this. And ever since we have kind of dreamt up of this plan of wanting to put together a startup fund of sorts, I thought I should reach out to the folks who are, I think, largely on this call. I'm going through names of people, and this is exactly the kind of group we wanted to connect to. So for me, I'll tell you what the ideal outcome for me out of this conversation would be. That would be for me to learn what you think of this idea that I'm going to share with you, and for you to then maybe sleep over this, think more about this, and then perhaps send me your feedback on whether you believe this would work or not, or is there something else that we need to do to refine this? So that's what I'm trying to do here, and I guess a secondary goal would be for some of you, if you do like the idea, to maybe join the Pakistan Startup Fund. So that's those are the two things I'm trying to accomplish from today. We have, I believe, about an hour. I'm actually leaving for the US tomorrow morning, not for the open conference, but I'm going elsewhere. But I'll be in your neck of the woods with the folks from the US. And so I need to go back and prepare for that too. So we have about an hour. I'll try and wrap this up in about 30 odd minutes, and then you could ask questions, but more importantly, critique what I'm going to say, so that as we begin to put the design of the startup fund together, we incorporate good ideas and feedback at this point in time from just the right kind of folks that Ali, Fahad, and his Park launch always somehow manages to couple together. So also great work, guys, in putting together this fantastic audience for this. So I don't know how many of you know me, but I'm basically a college professor. I did a PhD in computer science about 22 years ago, and then I've taught in universities for most of my life. But as most US professors are, I have a checkered past of doing startups, mostly that didn't succeed, but one or two that did all right too. And I've been in Pakistan for a long time also, where, among other things, I've done a few startups personally as a fledgling entrepreneur. But in my stint with the government in 2012, I helped put together our first government-backed startup incubator called Plan 9. And at the time, as we moved into the new and shiny Alpha Technology Park, the question is there something the government can do for startups in Pakistan? And and I remember agonizing over that for several weeks, trying to find out a design through which we could help startups without getting burnt. And without getting burnt is an important element here. Of course, one works with taxpayers' money in a country like Pakistan, where things can be quite treacherous when you are dealing with taxpayers' money. So the question was to put together a design that that scales, a design that's safe to execute with public sector money, and a design that solves a critical problem in this ecosystem of tech startups. So in 2012, we put together this incubator. At the time, it was literally one floor in the Alpha Tech Park. If some of you've been there, you would know. It was the ninth floor, and we called it Plan 9 for various reasons. But my reason was one, that was on the ninth floor, so that was the obvious reason. But the other reason was that with some of you may have a tech background, I have a operating systems background. That's what most of my research used to be. And there was an operating system that AT&T wrote called Plan 9, which was a reimagination of the Unix operating system, and the first one, a radical reimagination. So that's where the name Plan 9 came from, in case you were wondering. And the idea was really simple, was to give just free office space and facilities and a laptop and a tiny bit of stipend to startups, which are competitively selected. Give them an incubation cycle, which is, and with a clear finish line, so they don't meander along. They come in, they build a product, they succeed or fail, but and kind of operate at that pace. And so it was a 6-month incubation, and it was done through like a launch pad where we selected
Dr.
startups.
Saif, sorry for interrupting you. Just wanted to ask if do you want to share the slides because it will be
At some stage, I might. At some stage, I might. But I'm trying not to turn this
audience.
into.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm thinking like the audience would be able to sort of understand it better. So yeah, sorry,
Yeah,
but
at some stage, I'll probably put up slides also. But I'm hoping not to. But at some stage, I'll probably put together, I'll show you a couple of slides too. So this was in, sorry, I've now lost my train of thought. Thank you, Kashun, for
I'm
that.
sorry for that. But you were talking about the incubation center and how the
Yeah, so
six.
this was in 2012. So this was kind of the first large organized startup incubator in Pakistan. And we didn't really do much. We just made it competitive. We got all the industry involved, and we gave people a facility where they could come and kind of build clickable prototypes of their ideas. And that's what Plan 9 was. But based on the same architecture, we now have about 85 incubators in the country, out of which I think 10 or 12 are government-backed startup incubators, each one offering a 6-month incubation cycle, very similar model, some space and for startups to come in and do what they do. And because of that, I think we have about 4,000 odd startups in the country, and several hundred are investable, from what I can tell, in things that are obvious to do in a country like Pakistan. So that was Plan 9. We've now expanded on this. The private sector has gotten involved. They saw a successful model there, and there are literally about 85 odd replicas of the model that we put together then. The question now is that now I've moved to the federal government, so we are not in delivery anymore. So I don't need to build a startup incubator, even though we operate 8 national incubation cycle centers, some focused on specific areas like agriculture and so on and so forth. And the idea is, and the question now is, what is it that we do next? So there are 2 things we're going to do. And I, for full disclosure, told you that my purpose of doing this seminar is not to lecture you with slides, but to quickly wrap this up and get your feedback, because some of you may want to then get involved in some of the things that we put in together, and this is the right time for you to get involved as thought leaders and as people who contribute to this idea. So the first thing we're trying to do, and what we found with Plan 9 was that the startups that eventually became successful were startups that somehow managed to transport themselves to another accelerator incubator in a more developed ecosystem. So while we took raw startups and polished them a little bit, and out of that came out some good startups, the ones that truly succeeded or on a path to success are the ones that managed to find their way to the Y Combinator, or managed to find their ways into other or Capital Factory and this and that, various other incubator, Mass Challenge, this and that, where you kind of have a better developed ecosystem. So these startups would get access to risk capital, they'll get access to VCs, they would have a bigger cohort of folks to work with, and a better environment where they could chisel their idea and make it more practical. And based on that, we've now set aside about ₹1 billion, and I think some of the Ignite folks are in the call also, and they're largely the custodians of that program now. I think it's called Bridge Finance or something. There's a name to the program that we've thought of as well. But the idea is to now partner with incubators and accelerators globally. And for startups coming out of our incubators or from any other incubator, we provide funds and resources for these startups to be incubated in those accelerators or incubators. So the idea is that anyone who comes in out of these incubators in Pakistan, there are 85 of them, can we give them resources? Can we facilitate them to get incubated in Mass Challenge or in Code, this is Saudi, or Garage in Saudi, and a whole list, the raft of about 15, 20 good incubators that we have now shortlisted. And the idea is that we partner with these incubators and we put in the resources. In this case, ₹1 billion to start with in the first year, for these startups to be able to travel, to be incubated. If there are any fees to be paid to the incubator, we're happy to do it. So the first kind of the next step we're taking is to take these startups and put them and plant them in a more developed ecosystem where they can grow, get better access to funding, investors, a more developed ecosystem. So that's the first thing we're doing. There's a name to this also, the program, but that program is going to go into action shortly. Shortly is 3 to 4 weeks, but that's as much time as I have. The other thing that we're doing, which is why I wanted to reach out to you, one is for you to maybe suggest startup incubators that we should have as part of our list, that we should reach out to, find a way to partner with them, and find a way to send some startups every year to these incubators. So that's one ask that I have of you and of the folks who are here and are more familiar with that, with startup incubators, accelerators globally. Please do tell us, and we'll be very happy to reach out to them and find a way to support our startups to be able to travel there. And whether that's facilitation, giving them a small grant of 3 to 4 million rupees so that they can travel for their lodging, for the incubation cycle in a more developed ecosystem, I think that's something we should be willing to do. So we put aside funds to be able to do that. That's program number one. The second program that I am very excited about is something that we call the Pakistan Startup Fund. Again, the big question for us is, how do we use taxpayers' money in a way that's safe and in a way that still isn't just giving out grants to people? And we give lots of grants from Ignite and many other funds that we have in the government, with little accountability and little due diligence. These are grants, so we write them out. A 3 million rupee grant, there's only so much due diligence you can do with it. And we give lots of that out. And a lot of this money doesn't quite have the impact that you're looking for. But also, I didn't want the government to turn into a venture capitalist or try and pretend one. That wouldn't be great. And we certainly don't. A startup doesn't want to partner or give equity to government. That's not something you want to do, or something that I would ever suggest people do. Then we consider doing a fund of funds where we start giving funds to other funds who then go out and invest, and either as a matching fund or as equity, as almost an LP injection in a small funds in Pakistan. Now we don't have that kind of money though. So we had at this point in time I have 2 billion rupees for this year that I wanted to plow in this and see how far we could get. That's literally about $7 odd million, $10 million. So that's what we had, and so it's not enough money, of course, to become a fund of funds where you become an LP in one or multiple funds. And two, these are again private funds. So the question would be why this fund and why not that, and so on and so forth. So that was a big question for us. So the design now is as follows. So the design is that we become the last check of equity-free capital in a VC round. So the design of the Pakistan Startup Fund is that we are the last check of equity-free capital in a VC round. That's what we'll do, which means that a startup needs $1 million and reaches out to, I'm seeing messages from Atif, for instance. So Atif, you just on the spot, just because I saw a message from you. So reaches out to Atif and asks him to put in $1 million. But if Atif went through the Pakistan Startup Fund, so he found a startup, the startup wants $1 million, and it's an early stage startup. That's the space we can be in with the money that we have. But I think that's where also the big problem is, where, of course, small ticket investments are the biggest hurdle to startup growth. Once you are kind of in a growth phase, you have revenue and so on, then many more funding opportunities would open up to you. So therefore, after the incubation and this second order of acceleration outside of Pakistan, that's the second place. The third place to enable early stage investments and underwrite the risk of early stage investments by essentially putting in equity free capital as the last check in a funding round, early stage funding round. So let's say a startup needs $1 million, they reach out to Atif. Atif could certainly go ahead and put $1 million in that startup, but Atif could also choose to go via the Pakistan Startup Fund, which you're putting together. It'll have an independent investment committee. It can also go to the Pakistan Startup Fund, and Pakistan Startup Fund would say, you're putting in $1 million. You can choose to put in $700,000 and take equity for $1 million. You can choose to put in $7,000, and we'll put in $300,000 of equity-free money as part of this round. And that's all we'll do. So we'll have an independent investment committee, folks essentially like you. The government will have nothing to do with it. We will not do any due diligence to find startups, any of that. You found the startup, you found it investable, you've done your math and you've looked at the startup and all of that. And you're willing to put your skin in the game. In this case, 70%, 80% of the funding. But if you went through us, we would put in another between 10 and 30% of that round as equity free capital. So that's the space we'll be in, and that's the space we want to operate in. Now, this is a grant we write out, but as a last check of a early stage funding round by risk capital. So that's what we want to enable. We've set aside 2 billion rupees at this point. We could do it 2 billion every year, literally, if you needed to. There is a constant supply of money coming into Ignite. That's a fund that we have through which we'll operate. The idea is to enable around 30 investments every year through this. We'll put in a maximum of $300,000 in any funding round, $300,000. And we'll take we'll put in anywhere between 10 and 30% of that round, which means that the maximum we'll support is a $3 million investment. We put in $300,000, which is 10% of that as equity free capital. And there's some math around that you could do and so on. But that's essentially what we want to be able to do. So we can top up essentially a early stage funding round with grant money, equity free money, that puts in 10 to 30%. That way, we kind of underwrite the risk of private risk capital, VC capital, by 10 to 30% for you to get enticed, hopefully, to put money into our startups in Pakistan rather than a competing startup in some other country. That's the design. So we put in 10 to 30%, essentially free capital on the table, so that you can come in and put your other, 70, 80% that money. We underwrite your risk by 10 to 30% of early stage deals between $1 and $3 million of a round. And the goal is to entice you to consider Pakistan over other startups from competing territories. So that's the design. We don't want to take any board positions, no equity, no management interference, no restrictive clauses, none of that. We don't give a term sheet. We just, once you figured it out, there's investment committee, they look at it, bona fide deal, good VC who we know, and we vet it and is part of the Pakistan Startup Fund. A startup that we're familiar with is incorporated, all of that. And as you put in your money, we unlock this equity free capital as part of that deal. So that's the design of the park. It took me a lot of time, by the way, to think about this. I looked at Yozma, which is what Israel does. I looked at Enterprise Ireland, which is what Ireland does. These are, and many other, the UK innovate this and that. So I looked at many things that governments do, and they've also better structures to deal with this kind of play. In our case, we are more restrictive. We can either do public-private partnerships, not great, or we can give grants, or we could procure things, buy things. None of these modes are suitable in this case. So therefore, this is the design that we came up with. I spoke to two ex-governor state banks. Raza Bakir was very good. He was my head boy at HSN. Very good, smart guy. So I met with him, took his advice. I spoke to Tariq Bajwa, who was the governor state bank before that. He also a great friend. I worked with him in Punjab. I spoke to Akif, who is the chairman of SECP. He understands that space quite well. I took his advice and then went around and spoke to our finance minister, who actually had set up many funds, including Karandas. So she's quite familiar with how these funds are set up. And many other folks, some in this call as well. But after kind of losing sleep over this for good about 8 weeks, trying to figure out how we can enable this. This is the design that I've come up with now, and I wanted to leave you with design. So with this design, so the idea is that we'll do about 2 billion rupees a year. We can do this for a fairly long time, a couple of billion rupees a year of equity free capital, but almost as a last round into a startup. Now, what I want to do, and given that Kashun, and I really like that name, had asked me to put together slides. So I have several, but what I want to do is maybe show you one so that we bring it all together. Allow me to share my screen. I don't know whether you're able to. Can you see my screen? Okay, here you go. So this is one slide I wanted to show you. So this is what I'm hoping to accomplish by putting some money on the table of grant money that's otherwise also available as grants. By the way, we've been giving grants of this volume before also, but we're just trying to make that now count and make that more impactful. So is I think what we would begin to achieve if we did that well, we'll begin to streamline some deal flow, because startups would find out that they can go through our funds, so they would approach us. We could begin to simulate an angels list in Pakistan, because funds would want to get registered, be part of the Pakistan Startup Fund, to become part of our email list, maybe become part of, we can call it something like partners in Pakistan Startup Fund, or supporters, or part of the network, or whatever. I don't know, we can invent a nomenclature. First, for funds that want to go through us for deals, and want to be made aware of a deal going on, in which they could come and participate in a syndicated round. So if we become an angel list, then we could help syndicate some of these rounds. So we can help streamline some of the deal flow, because these startups would begin to approach us. There are many who are already on our radar because of the incubators that we've run and the space that we are in. We want to turn this Pakistan Startup Fund into a bit of an angel list, where all of you become part of it and made aware of whenever there's an allocation opportunity in a round with a hot startup that's already getting attention from some VCs, and some of our sweetening the pot with a top up that the Pakistan Startup Fund is willing to put in. And the idea is to underwrite the risk of early stage VC investments for 10 to 30% with a cap of $300,000 for the money that we put in. We'll have an independent investment committee. So I don't want the government to be involved in this at all in the sense that, of course, it's our money and you'll have to, there's of course a system at the back end of this, but I want this to be managed entirely by private sector folks who come in, make a little committee and kind of get to decide and make these decisions. And I certainly don't want any interference of the government in investment decisions or management or governance of startups. But I guess the catch here is that because you're putting 70 to 80% of your risk capital in a startup, you would have done the due diligence, you would provide the adult supervision, you will make sure it succeeds. So I don't have to lose sleep over this anymore. So therefore, that's the design. And that's the design. Now I do have slides. I didn't make all of them, but there is some process and there's some objectives, and I want to show this slide. So here's what I kept telling my team, that we literally only have about $2 billion, 2 billion rupees. So what can what can we do with this money? It's a small amount of money for, of course, in the startup world, for government, it's probably a large amount of money. But if we do put in a couple of billion, on average, we're expecting about 8 billion rupees worth of private VC capital that will be invested in startups, which means that we'll be enabling investments of 10 billion into startups. Now, because we're going to be playing in the early stage round, we're expecting a 20% dilution on average for a round like this, which means that we're creating a value of about 50 billion rupees. That's about $180 million. So the idea is to use whatever resources we have with the Pakistan Startup Fund to create value in the startup ecosystem of about 50 billion rupees by essentially enabling investment of 10 billion, 8 billion from of private risk capital, 2 billion topped up by the Pakistan Startup Fund. And that's the math. So that's the impact we are hoping to have with the Pakistan Startup Fund. And that was the only other slide worth showing. And this is what I am hoping to accomplish from this, which is to be able to sort of help syndicate rounds, streamline some deal flow, underwrite some risk of investments in Pakistani startups to entice you and you're all global investors to put money into our startups with the promise that even though it's taxpayers' government money, but the design is such that it's entirely safe and the government is very hands-off in how we will play this. So those are kind of the only couple of slides I wanted to show because these were the only meaningful ones. I will stop here now because we are at 9:30 as promised. And then feel free to ask questions, critique this model. I will take notes, and there are several folks in my team who I think are silently also spying on this session, and they'll be fervently taking down notes also to help improve our design. We've already, by the way, allocated this money, which was the hard part, and charmed the government into believing my story. So those two bits are already done. And because time is short in my world, it is this time a brief stint. So I'm hoping that all of this goes into action by December, and we hopefully, if all goes well and all of you get excited and there are deals already going on, we could be part of one by January, so that I get at least one cycle running by, like, and I have some influence over this, and then hopefully this would continue to work as all the incubators have continued to work. It's a design we put together many years ago, and it has continued to work because one could demonstrate it works. So that's all I had. That's the song I wanted to sing, but the big idea was to come here and seek your feedback. And the feedback could be of many forms, but I do want you to, I think there are many questions here, so Kashun can maybe read out some of those or summarize these for me, and my eyesight is such that this text size is too small. But why don't you summarize some of these questions for me, and then I can answer them. But do sympathize with the fact that I'm dealing with government's taxpayers' money, and hence the design had to be safe. So therefore, it's a grant, and it had to be such that you are no longer that you are not hounded or by government ever, and that you are protected from any pain of bureaucracy or red tape that the government is very prone to. So the design is such that we participate, but don't interfere. That's the mantra. So I'll stop here, let you ask questions and critique, and we will all take notes.
Awesome, awesome. I like how you said that you have parked the money. That's the clarification that everyone needed. I'll talk to you about that in the later half, but I'm holding back my questions because there are interesting questions in the chat. And I'll sort of club three questions for you. One is that when you're talking about early stage investments, are there any particular sectors that this startup fund is focusing on? And Two, it's like a two-way question, like how do you have you identified KPIs for the startups to measure the output? And then from the other side, how are you going to select investors, or I should put it like, how should investors be a part of this program? Because you were saying in the slide that you showed, you were saying this is early stage investment. So someone asked, how do you qualify early stage? So three questions for you clubbed together. You are on mute, sir.
Sorry, because you've asked three questions, I've already forgotten the first one, which was.
Was Are you particularly
Yeah, no,
focused?
no. I think no. I'm just joking. So I think I think so. I'm trying to come up with a design. My goal is to design it such that it scales and sustains itself. Right. That's what we're trying to do. So the first thing is that we have to be opportunistic. If we become too sectoral or very sector focused or niche focused, we limit ourselves. So I'm trying not to limit ourselves unnecessarily. One could get cute and say fintech or ag tech and God knows what else. But I think what we need to do is be opportunistic, which means that any good deal that happens, we could enable that. So I don't think we have the luxury at this point to be sector focused, even though it sounds great, but at this stage, also early stage, you want to be more experimental and more opportunistic than. So that's why it's not a fund of funds, and that's why we are not starting our own fund. And so I think we want to enable whatever good is happening out there. And 30 investments per year would already mean that you will be doing a little bit of fintech and a little bit of ag tech and a little bit of tech and a little bit of retail tech and B2B commerce and e-commerce and all of that. So I think we should enable all of that. And God knows from where would the next great startup would happen from any of this. So that's one. The second question was, how would we select startups or funds? Well, reach out to us. Also propose on what is a fair criteria for doing this. I'm hoping that we won't be very finicky about how we choose funds to work with. See, in this design that I've presented, the beauty of this design is that if there is a startup that someone's willing to put in $1 million, I don't have to think twice about it because it's already done. It's a bona fide startup. They must have seen something in it, otherwise they won't be wasting their $1 million. And if a fund is willing to put in $1 million in Pakistan, they're already a bona fide fund. It doesn't happen. So I guess all we need to be able to do is make sure that we impose some limits, minimum and maximum, on the rounds that we participate in. And I've already said we'll do 10 to 30%, which means that the deals would have to be between $1 million to $3 million of funding that goes into a startup. We'll put in anywhere between $100,000 to $300,000 of equity free capital. And that's the design. And does that answer your final question also, or have I left anything else out, Kashu?
Yeah, it was from the investors that how can they be part of this program and
You
what
have to
qualifies
ask them. Yeah, yeah. Well, the reason for doing this is to ask you to become part of us. Now, I don't have a glorified title for you yet if you become part of the Pakistan Startup Fund, but we can invent one. So feel free to propose one, whatever you want to do. We can certainly get lapel pins made for you and badges made for you and send them to you wherever you live in the world, that you are a glorified partner of the Pakistan Startup Fund. But we need to figure that structure out. My idea is that anyone reaches out to us, we'll be very welcoming of them. And the only criteria, and this would largely be decided by an independent investment committee, is which deals we participate in. Of course, we might be offered lots of deals, and given that they can only invest in 30 odd deals in a year, I guess they'll have to be somewhat choosy. And I've already told you that they'll likely look at deals between $1 million to $3 million. They'll put in between $100,000 to $300,000. And those are decisions that I want to leave to folks who really understand this. And we in government don't understand this as well. So we want this to be done by that investment committee. We're trying to, by the way, look for two good folks. Good folks are young investor types. So if you know of good people, do send their CVs to us also, like let's call them a chief investment officer and maybe an analyst or someone to work with them who can kind of oversee this. But then there's a committee of folks like you. Some of you would want to be on the committee because otherwise you'll see a conflict of interest, but you might want to propose people that we may want to put on this investment committee, and then we just entirely leave it to them. But I think what they would do is they would welcome every investor who remotely considers putting money into Pakistan. They might be slightly more choosy in which deals they participate or not. But in this list, Angels list, or this network investors that they make their partners at the Pakistan Startup Fund, they'll be, I think they should be as welcoming as they possibly can.
Right. There's another question which says, like, do these startups need to be registered in Pakistan? Most Pakistani startups are registered overseas in Holdco or
Right.
OPCO model.
That's
And
so that's the catch.
yeah,
So what I did kept emphasizing, maybe in small print, that of course my goal as someone who works for the government is for you to put money into Pakistani startups, which basically means that they're incorporated here. So so that's the deal. So that is the deal. However, I am at the same time working very hard to make it such that they don't face any issues in repatriating profits and dividends and gains and breakup values and all of that. So we will make it such that you don't have to go running off to another jurisdiction for making a hold or some equivalent, because it is more amenable for you to invest and do business there. I would very much hope that through the Pakistan Startup Fund, a large fraction of that startup's entity would be in Pakistan, and the entity that would receive your funding would be incorporated here.
yeah, that was one of my questions to you, like repatriation. It's an important issue in Pakistan. And one of the questions here also is like, can VC funds get investment capital from this Pakistan startup fund? And I know that investors usually, whenever we talk about investors coming into Pakistan, they're like, how can we get our money out of Pakistan, right? So how you've talked about the government, sort of providing the political risk insurance, sort of incentivizing, but what's the financial incentive in structure related, not like financing related?
Well, so there are many things we're doing. One is for these ICT companies to keep 50% of the money that they get from outside of Pakistan in dollar retention accounts. They are not converted in rupees, and you can take that money out of Pakistan as and when you want. You don't have to go seek permission of the central bank, state bank, or the bank that you have deposited this money with. So this is actually very similar to what you would do if you're familiar with the Russian digital account. So these are your dollars, you bring them in, you keep 50% of what comes in a dollar retention account, and you can take that out whenever you want, no questions asked. Two, IT companies have very little tax also, by the way. This is a very good regime of taxation that we have in Pakistan, and so on and so forth. We had some issue repatriating money from Pakistan, but that issue no longer exists as our current account deficits, this and that goes away. Our balance of payments issue goes away. And we've just put policies in where we're now making sure that foreign investors who put money in are able to repatriate their money. And let's defer that conversation for another time. But that is something we hope to be able to do. And if there are any specific issues for the VC world to be able to do it, I'm very happy to engage, understand, and facilitate. And we've done quite a bit of that for other things that we're trying to accomplish. And I'm hoping that through that, this issue for you will also be resolved. But if it isn't, I'm always happy to help out. But the idea here, of course, is that these entities would be incorporated in Pakistan, and your money would be put into Pakistani startups. And that once this money comes into a startup, 50% of that you can actually keep as in a dollar retention account.
Yeah, just interestingly, I was part of the conversations with the digital account that we were setting up for the ICT companies. And one note that I want to drop for the investors who are listening to this conversation is that the government of Pakistan is very much invested in resolving the repatriation issues. The state banks involved, the Prime Minister office involved, and I think, like Dr. Umar, you can talk more about it, but they're also introducing the corporate digital cards for the company, so they can repatriate without any layers of approvals or channels of access. And this is something which is similar to how Singapore is doing. And these sort of channels sort of help investors reduce the risk or the concerns that investors have. But definitely a lot happening on that side. I second you, Dr. Umar. There's also another question, and while we're talking about the synergy with the state bank and other government authorities in Pakistan, someone has asked the question, why not engage business councils in their respective countries? They'll go ahead, establish routes with the local incubators. Example is Hub 71 in UAE. Business councils work closely with embassies so they could introduce the startups with the local communities.
So we are doing a fair bit of that, and we've engaged our embassies and our trade missions globally now. I am doing that with a lot of effort to kind of wake them up and through them try and understand how we could get our startups to go and get business or visibility or funding in other economies. But one of the reasons for connecting today is for you to also propose, and you already proposed perhaps one name of incubator. You said start 71 or so. So I do keep those ideas coming. My team is also taking note. They are at this point putting together a list of incubators that we should befriend, that for which we should invest into our startups to be able to go and be part of those programs. By the way, for all that we've created in Pakistan, whenever I travel, I was in Saudi and I went to their incubator called Garage. And everyone kept talking about it. The IT minister and the investment minister and their prince and that. And said, have you been to Garage? And I actually went there for a day because there's so much to do back home that I stayed on for the day just to be able to go to this incubator. And I went there, and Antler was running a boot camp or some equivalent. And it was run by this guy who used to run Daraz in Pakistan. I forgot his name. And he said we have what 30 odd startups here, and 13 of those are from Pakistan. So 13 Pakistani founders, so single largest cohort. So these guys are doing fantastically well, and some of them, if they had the resources that we're now putting on the table, for them to travel and provide for lodging and incubation fees and acceleration fees and all of that, I think we would be able to send even more than that. So, but I think Pakistan does have a lot of good investable startups. I believe I saw a comment of that sort also. I think it's just a matter of now, sort of having kind of re-energizing this startup ecosystem. Of course, in 2021, 22, we had good about what $700 million coming in for these startups, and because the global VC funding, because the Fed rates, etc., is dried up. So, I think at least enabling early stage investment so that we build some deal flow for bigger ticket sizes as VC money becomes available. I'm hoping around March, April next year, second quarter. That's the expectation right now. I think this would then we'll have lots of startups maybe ready by that time with an initial injection of $1 to $3 million. They can do a $8 to $10 million round, this which is where a lot of you would want to come in also. I did see another comment also, which is that of course you have low faith in Pakistan and Pakistan government. I don't blame you for having little faith. And two, I'm of course an interim minister, which means that I go away shortly. And therefore, the design that I've put together is deliberately put together in a way that it outlives me. One, we have short funding for it. We have made it such that Ignite, which gets 0.5% of all the telecom revenue in Pakistan, a large part of that funding goes into Pakistan Startup Fund, and this becomes the vehicle or the mechanism through which they support the startup ecosystem beyond the incubation space that they're active in. And that we put together an investment committee, that all of you great folks become part of this investor network of the Pakistan Startup Fund. And then I won't have to worry about it. Maybe a few months down the road, I will join the Pakistan Startup Fund as an investor too. So I'm hoping that this would continue to hum along and will sustain itself.
Yeah, we're also getting follow-up questions on the Holdco comment that you mailed earlier. I don't know if you want to talk in detail about it because I have another question. So I'll give you two questions and then you can talk about them together. And the second one is like, again, they're saying, why can't, sorry. startups that have holdcos and their opcos are in Pakistan, why can't the grant be given to the opco? And the second question is that you have already invited people to join the advisory committee. What discretion will the committee have? And generally, like, can you speak a little about the role of the committee so that they're more
Right.
aware?
Let's answer the second question first. It'll act exactly like investment committee. So the idea is that they'll vet the deals, they'll look at the deals, they'll choose to either participate in deals or turn them down. They'll also decide on the ticket size between $100,000 $300,000, and they can help you syndicate rounds through the Pakistan Startup Fund with other investors that are part of our network. So that's kind of their mandate, so to speak, and their discretion. And I really want to involve good people from the community and empower them to be able to then make those decisions. That's their discretion. We can give them some KPIs, broad KPIs, but some of you are investors, of course, so you understand that this ain't the kind of thing that you reduce to KPIs and numbers, and you don't restrict people from making opportunistic investments, especially in the early stage. You have to make a lot of decisions based on gut and just experience and understanding and faith. So I hope they'll do the same also, and that we'll make it as less restrictive as we possibly can. 30 investments in a year is decent. It's not a hell lot, but still 30 will give them enough opportunity to make a few mistakes without having to lose too much sleep over it. But that's the idea. The idea is to act like an early stage investor where you have a pot of funds and you're happy to make mistakes and make big bets. This is the stage where you make a bet, and there's little to show otherwise. So, and I don't want to really reduce this to KPIs, etc. But if you have any ideas on anything you want to pass on to them and recommendations for people who should be part of this investment committee, do feel free to pass that on, and we look at it, and maybe we can have another session, and some of the folks that you recommend have already become part of this startup fund and could be fielding some of these questions on my behalf, and you can give them more suggestions too. And the holdco, I haven't said that these startups can't have a holdco. There are many companies that have entities outside that either own them entirely or a large fraction of it, of course. But the entity that gets our funding would be the entity in Pakistan. And the entity that receives your funding would be the entity in Pakistan. So as you unlock 70, 80% of your funds, you get 20, 30%, 10% from us. That's the deal. And of course, there could be another company outside, call it a holdco or whatever, that owns some fraction of this entity, could be a large fraction also. And we're not concerned about that. What we are concerned about is for this entity in Pakistan to be registered here, for this entity to receive your funding, and for us to top it up with 10 to 30% of our grant.
Right, awesome. I know you've talked about how the structure is still in the process, and once the startup fund is established, people can still reach out to the government. But can you specifically mention, like you mentioned, Ignite? So, should investors and startups reach out to Ignite for further questions, or is there a portal or email address that they can reach out for further inquiries?
Is someone from Ignite in this call? And if they are, maybe they need to unmute themselves, so at least I know who this person is. Is Ahad on this call? Ahad, are you in the call? Is Ahad in the call?
Let me
Ahad
check.
is okay.
Um,
Do you have the power to unmute them? Who has the power? There
Ahad
is an
raised his hand. We can.
Muhammad Anwar. Is someone from our PMO also part of it? Okay. Anwar, अपना कौन है?
SN
एहसान
Elahi, yeah, I see SN Elahi.
एहसान जरा एक काम करें, अपना ना psf@pakistan.gov.pk एक email address बनवा दें. psf@pakistan.gov.pk and get that made ASAP. And once you've made it, let Ali and Kashun know that you've made this. Let that be an email that they can reach out to. So PSF, Pakistan Startup Fund, at pakistan.gov.pk. Easy to remember also. So Sanjay ji, jaldi बनवा लेना अभी सोने से पहले हैं. So let's get
Awesome.
that made. We'll let you know that the email address is. Let's start with at least where you could send emails, and someone would receive them, and I'll get a copy of that too. And then let that be the starting point to do this. But we are all on a WhatsApp group on this Park launch, and you have my number there also. So feel free to contact me over WhatsApp. My own email addresses are well known. Actually, it's umar@pakistan.gov.pk. It's UMAR UMAR, A for America, at pakistan.gov.pk. So feel free to send ideas to this email also, or any other emails you might be able to look up online. All of them do point into the same inbox. So I'll get a copy.
Great. Yeah, once Ignite send out the email, Ali Fahad Bhai and like Park Launch can circulate the email, also your email address. People have it. So please reach out to Dr. Saif and the team to send in further questions. I'll be taking like the last few questions right now because I know we're short on time. So one of the question here is, apart from the maximum value of 3 million of a round, should there be a minimum value of the round to qualify for the grant through Pakistan Startup Fund?
Sorry, I was just trying to write something in a chat box, and I thought that message would go to everyone. Maybe not.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it can. So if you're writing your email address, you can do like everyone.
Everyone. Got it. Here you go. So this is the email address I'm trying to create, and this is the email that I temporarily have while I'm in the government. This is the one that you can always use.
Awesome. So I think the biggest incentive here is that the federal minister is sending out emails himself personally. So that's a validation that the startup fund is has a lot of investment from the government itself. Like the government is invested. So please get interested in the program, reach out. Um, so the question was that is there a minimum requirement to qualify for the grant?
I guess the minimum requirement would be for someone to agree to put in $1 million into a startup in Pakistan, and for us to come in and say, hey, wait, you can put in 7,000 and take 3,000 from us. That's the deal. And if you can put in 7,000, most welcome. I think we'll be very welcoming. We wouldn't be too finicky about that at all. And the idea is to enable early stage investments. But I guess early stage is still, and the world has moved along. I've seen literally a $30 million pre-seed round. So I don't know what this world has become. When I was younger, pre-seed rounds would mean $500,000, but they mean $30 million these days. But I guess for us, it'll be, an early stage would be $1 million. So that's a ticket size, a minimum ticket size of 1 million, a maximum ticket size of $3 million. Early stage investments, we put in $100,000 to $300,000 of money. I guess that's all I had. And I don't think we should make that more restrictive. Otherwise, we'll restrict good deals from happening.
Awesome. So, as much as I am a supporter of Pakistan's tech ecosystem and a strong proponent of investments, foreign investments in Pakistan, I have to bring up this question. It was also in the chat. You mentioned that the fund will start in January. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
It
But we
started
all
in December, and I'm hoping we'll be able to participate in our first deal in January if all of you are as excited about it as I am.
Awesome. But we also know that we are going into an election year, and continuity at times is a challenge in Pakistan. So, what's this fund going to look like in the following years to come, especially with the election just hanging over? So, can you speak to the investors about it?
Sure. No, I think that's a fair question. I've tried to answer it earlier. I'm happy to answer it again, just so that we reaffirm some faith in this. The big deal in the government is to allocate funds. Allocate funds in a program, we call it a PC1, where anyone who writes that PC1, which is a piece of paper on which you design such programs, and anyone who approves it are all then signed up on this. So it's not just then me deciding to spend this money. This PC1's been written by Ignite, which is an organization that we have, vetted by the Planning Commission, and will shortly be approved by all these stakeholders. And the money will be set aside to be spent in the format that we've just discussed. And then going forward, I'm hoping that beyond this PC1, which is for the next year or two, we will have a couple of billion rupees going into this fund from Ignite. Now, Ignite is our essentially a telecom ICT R&D fund. Many countries have it. In Pakistan, 0.5% of the revenue of all the telecom operators in Pakistan goes into this fund year after year. So it's a fund that currently has accumulated about 13 billion rupees. And so every year, some money goes into this fund from the telecom operators as a tax levy on their operations in Pakistan. So in Pakistan, the regime is 0.5% of the revenue of the telecom operators. And currently, I think the fund stands at about 13 billion rupees. And I think a few billion rupees come into this program every year. This is through the Ignite that we run the national incubation centers and many things that we do with you guys and so on and so forth. And we do the hackathons and this and that. That's the funding. That's the short funding behind it. And I'm hoping that Ignite funding would become part of this. This investment committee we put together would be largely independent, and we'll take it forward, and we'll put together a very small team of like a chief investment officer, an analyst or associate or something like that to come in and take this forward. So I've designed it such that it does not depend on me, that it is largely run by folks like you who are independent, who just believe in the idea. And I've made it such that there's a short funding, at least for the next couple of years, and then going forward through Ignite perpetually. And that this is how we spend the Ignite money to enable early stage VC investments in Pakistan.
Great. We're almost running out of time, but there's someone in the chat box who showed interest, and it would be unfair to not call it out. Someone said we have an advisor from Massachusetts. She's ready to invest in us as well. Would Pakistan Startup Fund put 30% if she finalizes her side? How can we do this process? Whom to approach? You already have the email address, so maybe you can just answer
Yeah,
the
of
first.
course, and that is great. Maybe this is the investment that happens in January. So I'm sure there are others also, and I want you to keep that optimism about VCs. At times do take fairly long times for their money to finally arrive in your bank, but I hope that because of this sense of urgency, where I go away at the end of Jan, hopefully, and therefore we must try and get a deal or two done before that happens, and we have that money set aside. If someone's willing to put in $7,000, $800,000 in your startup, someone's willing to put in $2.5 million in your startup, hey, we will come in and put the rest of it, and very happy to do it. And if you could really convince someone to make that happen quickly, we are game.
Great. We're getting a lot of questions, but I'm sorry we're out of time. I'm so thankful that all of you guys are showing so much interest. But Dr. Saif, I'll let you make your final comments.
Well, final comment is that I hope this begins to happen. We are very excited about this. It has taken us good about 8 to 10 weeks. In my world, that's a long time because it was an interim setup to come up with this design. But I think this is a design that's sustainable. That's a design that in which the government participates without interfering. It's a design where we'll hopefully encourage you to begin to make more and more investments in the early stage rounds for Pakistani startups, so that some of them are on a runway for a Series A injection when real VC money becomes available 6, 7 months down the road globally. That's what we are hoping we'll be able to enable, and I hope it does. And it's a great big market, of course. It's a market where, and I keep telling people this, so let me repeat myself, where 85% of the adult population is unbanked. That's 100 million people. They are unbanked. So imagine the value of a fintech finally making it in this country. And we've had $700 million worth of money invested in startups, and none of them has become a unicorn yet. So if you were an associate or an analyst or a GP in a fund and were making an investment thesis on where you can go and get an outsized return, you would want to look at a country where some VC money is already flown in. So someone's done the due diligence, someone's done the numbers, and that's $800 million of money that's come in from Kleiner Perkins and many other folks on the Sand Hill Road. That money's already come in. So these are good investable startups. The market opportunity here is real. The TAM is out of this world. You can get very big outsized returns from investments that you make here. And the government is bending over backwards, which is what this is, to enable you to come and put your money in. And in this market, no unicorn has happened yet. Pakistan has not had a Paytm. We haven't had a Flipkart, and we haven't had any Baiju and Paytm. None of that has happened in this country. And there is no reason it's not going to happen. It will 100% happen. And I hope that you choose to be part of that story. So that's my pitch for Pakistan. And that's my parting thought. Everyone, thank you so much for for being here. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Ali and Kashun, for organizing this. I am very thankful, and I hope to hear from you guys.
Thank you for taking out time for this. I also second you that Pakistan is a thriving space, especially for startups. So don't miss out on this opportunity and this market, which is thriving at the moment. Dr. Saif has mentioned 3 email addresses, so please reach out to him with your inquiries, and also like book your spots for the investments early on. What I would like to say. Also, thank you to Ali Fahad Bhai and Park Launch for organizing this webinar and for taking me up as well. And yep, that would be it. Thank you all for taking out time. Um, Looking forward to doing like a 2.0 of this startup fund where we'll be talking about the investments, and maybe we could have like investors on this call who are talking about their success stories. I'm looking forward to that. Thank you so much, everyone.
Excellent. Take care, guys. Okay, bye bye.
Bye bye.